Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's educational webinar with Cancer Support Community Los Angeles. I'm Kathy Riley, the Associate Director of Programs at CSCLA, and I'm really honored to welcome you to this week's webinar titled Stronger Together. Before we begin, if this is your first time joining us, Cancer Support Community Los Angeles is a premier nonprofit organization providing vital social and emotional support to families facing cancer, including patients, caregivers, and their loved ones, all at no cost. And our programs include support groups, healthy lifestyle classes, social activities, and educational programs such as this one. If you would like to learn more about our services or watch past webinars, visit our website at cancersupportla.org. And before I introduce today's speaker, please note that your video and microphone are automatically disabled for this webinar. You may, though, enter your questions into the Q&A feature found at the bottom of the Zoom window at any time. And questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. We may not be able to get to all of your questions today, but we'll get to as many as possible. So I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Lynne Thomas is a licensed clinical social worker in the Department of Supportive Care at City of Hope. She came to City of Hope in 2020 from Fred Hutch Cancer Center in Seattle, Washington, where she was a research coordinator for the Women's Health Initiative. Lynne received her undergraduate degree from California State University in Long Beach, California, and majored in research psychology. She then went on to earn her master's degree in social work from the University of Washington in Seattle. Lynne has been a couples clinician with the Couples Coping with Cancer Together program at City of Hope since joining City of Hope, and she is passionate about helping patients and their partners manage the challenges and the stressors of cancer and create the relationships that they want. So it really gives me great pleasure to introduce Lynne Thomas. Lynne, please join us.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That was such a nice introduction, and I feel like I had this big reveal by unmuting myself. So as Kathy said, my name is Lynne, and I am a native of Southern California, but I lived a good portion of my adult life in the beautiful Pacific Northwest, where I raised my 3 children. And then I moved back to Southern California 3.5 years ago to help my elderly parents in the last chapter of their 75 years married together. And I also have had the pleasure of working in medical oncology, social work as a couples clinician, as Kathy mentioned. So I'm going to just ask you to share with me a little bit of information about you. So I'd like you to complete a quick survey that Abby is going to put on the screen. And I ask that you go ahead and select all the answers that apply to you. And then when we're done, we'll just, I guess those will be tallied up. Okay. Abby, are we all right to go ahead? Let me see. Great. Wonderful. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate that. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and as we're moving through the content of what I'm sharing and you have questions, as Kathy said, you can enter those questions into the chat and we'll take the last portion of our time together to answer those questions, and hopefully we can get to them all. So though we're going to be talking about couples facing a cancer diagnosis and treatment, this topic really does apply to all of us. We all have partners or families, people we love and care about, and we all have times of crisis in our lives. When we commit to a relationship, we know that it's going to end someday, because they all do. But we have the courage to commit anyway. And this is important, and I'm going to come back to this. We're here today. I'm going to share my screen now. We're here today because a serious illness such as cancer is a reminder of the importance of time and living the relationship we really want to have, showing up in our relationship with courage, honesty, curiosity, and compassion right now, today. We're going to talk about relationships and how to deeply connect at a time when we need it the most. My objective for our time together is to share what I've learned from working with patients and their partners who are facing cancer. The Couples Coping Together Against Cancer program at City of Hope has helped over 3,000 couples, patients who have just been diagnosed, patients who are in the middle of their treatment, those who are living with cancer, and those who are dying from cancer. Cancer and its treatment can easily become a full-time job, and it does impact relationships, and it creates changes over time. I'll also be sharing some learnings from research, clinical experience, and training about how patients and partners can best support one another and work together as a team so that they can get the most out of their medical care and the most out of their time together. I'm going to be covering multiple topics. Oops, I think I got ahead of myself. Multiple topics throughout this webinar, and I want to introduce them to you. So let me go back. Here we go. So I'm going to be talking about these topics throughout the webinar, and I do want to introduce them right away. So we're going to be talking about the couples program at City of Hope. We're going to be talking about relationships in the context of cancer, coping and communication, time, and lastly, connection. So you'll see that slide several times in my presentation. This is kind of an anchor for us. So for the past 10 years, the Couples Coping Together Against Cancer program within the Department of Supportive Care Medicine at City of Hope has helped couples navigate the complex problems and emotions that arise with a cancer diagnosis through targeted interventions. The ultimate goal of the couples program from a patient's very first visit to City of Hope is to strategically encourage couples to galvanize their inherent strengths that they each have and the strength of their committed partnership. The couples program aims to improve their communication and coping skills, decrease their stress levels, and increase the ability to focus on and make the most of their medical care and their time with one another. Those are our three overarching aims with this program. So I want to talk a little bit about our strength-based interventions. We are proactively screening and identifying and addressing patient and partner biopsychosocial distress so that they can best engage in the benefits of their medical care. This screening reveals where couples may need extra help and alignment. And we provide access to psychosocial services promptly before the patient even sees their doctor. or at any point in the trajectory of their treatment. For example, they can receive support from social work, child life specialists, spiritual care, patient navigation, and community resources such as Cancer Support Community. The psychoeducation, in many ways, is the cornerstone of our program. It focuses on normalizing the responses to a cancer diagnosis. It also normalizes the differences of coping and communication styles between the members of the couple. And then we teach practical behaviors that they can immediately begin practicing in their relationship to improve communication and problem solving. We also share insight about how important it is for the partner to be emotionally supportive and actively involved in the patient's medical care. We provide supportive counseling for couples one-on-one and in the couples group, where we teach skillful and effective communication and coping while recognizing differences and strengths, that what works for one person might not work for their partner, and that's okay. These interventions are all strategic. The program helps couples identify their individual and collective strengths. This focus on strengths is distinctive and it's purposeful. It's different than simply processing the emotions of a painful experience. Instead, it focuses, instead of focusing on the deficits, the unknowns, or the unknowns and the fears of the future or the past hurts, we focus on the current situation and use the strength of the relationship that has kept them together all this time. So now we're going to transition to talking about relationships in the context of cancer. Research shows that people in healthy relationships live longer and better. This fact holds true when couples are facing serious health issues like cancer. Any major illness, such as cancer, does transform a person, a family, and relationships. In addition to the impact that cancer has on the individual that's been diagnosed, their intimate partners often face distress as well. When patients have a supportive partner, they do better with their illness. They are more consistent with their care, they eat healthier, they exercise more, they do all the healthier things because, face it, we all need people to encourage us and move us forward, especially in times of stress. Couples can struggle with adjusting to living with the uncertainty after a diagnosis. They're changing roles and responsibilities, managing competing priorities such as their health, their family, work, finding new ways to offer mutual support, communicate, feel intimacy, and deal with stress and problem solving effectively. Teamwork is powerful. An emotionally supportive and actively involved partner really does make a difference. Now I want to turn to coping in the context of cancer. I've already called attention to an underlying assumption that a cancer diagnosis may create stress for people. I want to spend some time now talking a little bit about stress responses, some that are adaptive or skillful, and some that are maladaptive or unskillful. The first two that I want to talk about, we all might be familiar with, the fight or flight responses. These are natural inclinations during times of stress, and they can be adaptive and maladaptive. The first two that I talked about, fight and flight responses, many of us are familiar with this fight or flight response. And this is, of course, the response that, in a very simplistic manner, involves either putting up your dukes and attacking or turning around and fleeing as quickly as possible. So fight actions help manage stressors. Turning inward as an example of flight, they're not necessarily running away, but they might be turning inward to access internal resources related to problem solving. So I think it's important here to take a moment to translate the fight or flight stress response into a medical story, since those who have this response and are diagnosed with cancer or caring for a loved one diagnosed with cancer, they're not literally putting on their boxing gloves, obviously, right? Or running away from the situation. Instead, what we see is an internal fight or flight response. When confronted by stressors that are not manageable by immediate action, fight, people tend to turn inward, flight, to access internal resources and for reflection related to problem solving. And this is very common because during a cancer diagnosis, so much is out of our control. During the diagnosis and the treatment, you have all these medical appointments and somebody else is telling you what treatment you need and when you need it. So a loss of control is a very common shared experience. Another response to stress is what can be called tend and befriend. This is a model also, and tending refers to how some of us will engage in nurturing activities that protect and promote safety. Befriending refers to the creation and maintenance of social networks, reaching out to others for help and support and information in times of stress. Some people tend to respond to stress by moving quickly into problem solving, while other people tend to respond by verbally processing the issue. A problem solving instinct can obviously be quite adaptive. It allows them to focus time and mental energy on a single issue and often work out an effective solution. The downside is that a person can often feel a high level of pressure to fix problems and can feel like they're failing when they're not able to, especially in the context of cancer. Because, as I said, many of the problems are simply out of their hands, out of their control. So this can feel very discouraging and can leave a person feeling helpless and frustrated. In the context of a relationship, this focus on problem solving can also minimize the emotional experience of their partner and leave him or her feeling isolated and alone with those feelings. For others, research shows that there is an actual benefit from the process of talking through their challenges, their stressors, and their fears. Whether or not that conversation leads to a change in an outcome or behaviors, it's the ventilation in and of itself that's helpful for some people. Verbal processing can become problematic as well because it can pull a person away from the present, causing them to get sucked into the what ifs of the future and also ruminating on events in the past that can't be changed. There are individual coping strategies, and when we are part of a partnership, there are relationship coping strategies as well. There's been growing research over the past 20 to 30 years, which has shown that positive dyadic coping, which is couples addressing stressors together, is a predictor of how well a couple is able to adjust to stress, such as a serious illness. And it's also an indicator of relationship satisfaction. Communal coping occurs when one or more of the individuals perceive a stressor as our problem, which is a social appraisal, versus my problem or your problem, which is an individualistic appraisal. And it can activate a process of shared or collaborative coping. Relationship-focused coping is a strength when we're in a committed relationship. As mentioned earlier, disease is not just impacting the individual who's been diagnosed, but also their partner, their family, their entire support network. I've spent a fair amount of time so far talking about the different types of responses to stress and coping because the different ways in which the members of the couple respond and cope can cause a disconnection. It's so very important to not allow the stressor, which in this case is cancer, to come between the members and instead appreciate the differences and view them as strengths that they are. So, what works for one person, as I said, might not work for the other. And again, that's okay. There's no one way to live with cancer. But we do know that working together as a team, bringing together the individual strengths and adding the strength of the committed relationship helps immeasurably. So now I want to transition from coping to communication. And I want to talk specifically about ineffective and effective communication. Protective buffering is an example of ineffective communication, and it can occur even in the healthiest relationships. It usually comes from a place of love, wanting to protect the person that we love. But perversely, it can lead to isolation and disconnection. So, what can protective buffering look like in the context of cancer? It can be avoiding cancer related discussions, such as end of life. It can be non disclosure between cancer patients and their partners, both ways. It can look like denying feelings or fears. Why do we do it? Why do we do protective buffering? It is a desire to shield or protect one's partner from distress. It's a desire to maintain hope and optimism and a sense of normalcy. Or maybe we might perceive our partner as being critical, unreceptive, or uncomfortable with the topic. Now, the impacts of protective buffering can include feelings of disconnection and isolation. It can also lead to higher levels of individual psychological distress and poorer relationship functioning. Research shows that at the other end of the spectrum, open and honest, courageous, compassionate, and specific communication is important with coping with a serious illness. So, open communication has been correlated with decreased distress, improved mood for both individuals, and enhanced feelings of closeness and intimacy. And I want to just point out that this often, protective buffering often occurs within families where there are children still in the household, so younger children, where a patient and partner might feel like they need to protect their children and not share about the cancer diagnosis, or one person wants to protect and the other person feels like they need to talk about it with the kids. We have child life specialists here, and they have educated us that it is really important in an age appropriate way to share with our children what's going on, because our children do sense, they're very connected to us, right? And they're watching us all the time. So they can sense when something's not quite right. And if we're telling them, no, everything's fine, then it creates some mistrust for themselves and how they're perceiving the world, and then mistrust with us. So we always encourage open and honest and age communication. And I want to talk about another time when it's really important to utilize open and honest and courageous and specific communication with each other and the medical team. City of Hope data shows that nearly a third of couples are misaligned in their understanding of the prognosis. So one person might think it's a very treatable cancer, and a complete recovery is 75 to 100% likely. Or the other person might think, oh my gosh, no, it's only 25 to 50% likely, or there's no cure. Alignment really is essential, because unrealistic expectations can impede the healing experience, complicate interactions with doctors, and increase anxiety and depression. So articulating perception of the medical situation, what we call prognosis, really matters. Perceptions are powerful drivers of the biopsychosocial responses, and it's essential. A real common aligned understanding of prognosis is essential for decision making. So non-disclosure or not talking about prognosis is very risky. Couples tell us about difficulties that they experience talking around or about certain topics, such as sexual concerns, finances, fears about death, impacts of the treatment, loss of income, their needs and wants at this time, planning for the future, advanced planning, changing roles and responsibilities, competing priorities, as I mentioned before, how to talk with young children, and spiritual beliefs. We encourage couples to use the strength and the courage of their committed relationship to talk about these difficult topics. Be specific with your needs. Communicating what you need from your partner at the beginning of an interaction helps to mitigate presuming our partner can mind read or always anticipate our changing needs. And being specific also helps our partner know how to meet our needs and increases the likelihood that our needs will actually be met. So now I want to transition to the concept of time. As I mentioned before at the beginning, all relationships end, and the time we have with our loved ones will end at some unknown point. Instead of focusing on what you've lost, we encourage our couples to make the most of what you have, and this includes your time together. Couples want to feel proud of how they're supporting one another, and they want to avoid regrets. I want to share this quote from one of our surviving partners. She said, "It's hard to imagine that he was diagnosed 23 months ago, and his care has taken a toll on me, both emotionally and physically. I remember in our early conversations, you suggested framing the question of how to care for him in terms of whether I'd be proud of my actions after he died. I'm deeply sad, but the answer is yes. Thank you for your help during this very difficult period of our lives." This brings me to the topic and brings us to the topic of connection. And it's a final topic, and it's really important. This is a time to turn toward one another, to align as a team, as a partnership against the cancer, to see cancer as a catalyst, an opportunity to redefine your priorities, to learn more about yourself and your loved one. This is an experience that you're each having together and individually. A sure way to deepen the connection of your relationship is through being curious and wanting to understand what this is like for your partner. So to understand your partner's perspective. Intimacy is influenced not only by disclosure, but perhaps more importantly by a sense of responsiveness. In other words, understanding, acceptance, validation, caring from one's partner. It is very helpful to create rituals with one another. A ritual of connection is a reliable method of intentionally turning toward one another. Connection can look like having coffee with each other first thing in the morning, every day, walking together every day, watching a show together, or taking turns watching a show that your partner really likes. It's just spending time together on a regular and predictable basis that makes a difference. None of us are going to be perfect in our relationships. There will be an endless supply of opportunities to repair and reconnect when we've disappointed ourselves or the person we love. It's very okay to say, I didn't respond and show up the way I'm proud of, and I'm sorry, and then strive to do better. I want to share some quotes. We get quotes all the time, feedback from couples and providers. And I just included a few quotes that we've received recently, and I want to share them with you. So we've been married for 50 years, and we've never had a conversation like this. Before meeting with you, I had no intention of involving my partner in my care until I had more information due to his anxiety. Since meeting with you, we feel closer as a couple and able to talk about anything on our minds. This was a game changer. Your help today was so needed. I feel like I'm better able to support my wife and also be vulnerable and ask for help myself. My husband wasn't too sure about this, but I'm so glad he agreed because I've been feeling sad, not knowing if he understands what I'm going through. We loved our time with you. We continued talking way into the night about what we had learned or knew, but just heard differently and more insightful. I really appreciate your help with this patient and her husband. It was such an impactful discussion on how they can support each other and the whole family. Thank you for your time and much needed support. Sorry for being emotional. Maybe because it's of the residual of the conversation me and my husband had before meeting, and your support really helped, and we both had good conversation after. Thanks again, and we're in this together. And finally, I just want to talk about some other learnings from the past 10 years that this program has been running. There are some culturally specific needs, and we have been so fortunate to have a bilingual couples counselor, clinician. Her name is Claudia Cuevas, and she is able to meet with our monolingual Spanish-speaking patients and their partners. And one of the things that we have discovered through her work with them is how reliant monolingual families are on their adult children. So very often a patient will plan to bring one of their adult children, usually the daughter, to the medical appointment consultation rather than a partner. And through our work, Claudia's been able to do with all of these monolingual Spanish couples is to be able to share how important it is that the partner is involved, the partner is actively involved, coming to the appointments. And this really has been a game changer. We've also learned that there's some age and stage perspectives that are unique. So younger couples face different challenges than older patients who maybe are retired. The younger ones are really struggling to manage the competing priorities of their families, young families, and their work, and a sense of loss of their dream of what their life was going to be like at this stage. And our older patients, some of them are much more resilient because they've been through a lot in their lives. And they have this life perspective so that this is a bump. It's a bend in the road, and they have a whole life perspective to know that there's been a lot of other bends in the road for them, and they've gotten through them. We've also learned the value of technology. So since the pandemic, we quickly pivoted and offered all of our interventions remotely. And that has been another game changer. So we're able to meet with more couples and do it at a time and a place that's more convenient for them using telehealth and televideo. And then most recently, in the past year, we've expanded into a new cancer. Incurable brain cancer is one of the most difficult diagnoses. Fear is universal in any kind of cancer. But one thing that's unique about brain cancer is the heaviness and the urgency of time. Although scientists are pursuing promising new research, most people with a malignant brain tumor survive only 12 to 18 months after diagnosis. So in addition, the disease progresses quickly, changing a person's cognition, mobility, and personality. This stress is enormous. So the goal of the new Couples Coping Together Against Brain Cancer program is to help couples find better ways of communicating, coping, and making the most of precious time. So the photo at the bottom of this slide is all four of our couples clinicians and my contact information. And I just want to leave you with one last learning. We have found time and time again that couples can deepen their intimacy with one another and feel proud of how they've managed the stressors and the challenges of cancer and supported one another through a very difficult time in their lives. It might be hard to imagine, but many couples have said that the cancer brought out the best in them, and they believe the relationship is better because of it. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to share all of this wisdom that we've collected from couples.
Well, Lynn, thank you so much for that meaningful presentation. I learned much. And now we want to welcome questions from all of you who are attending today. Feel free to type any questions that you have into the Q&A feature that's found at the bottom of the Zoom window. We received some questions from registration, so I'll start with one of those, but please do engage with us in the Q&A today. So you talked about communication as such an important aspect of partnering together to face a cancer diagnosis. What are your suggestions for how a partner improves communication skills when they struggled with honest communication, prior to the diagnosis? How do they now make that shift?
Yeah, it's a new skill, right? And it's going to take practice. One of the ways, a couple of things that we recommend is one, being curious and asking what your partner needs from you in that moment. So, do you need me to just listen? Do you need me to help you with something? Do you need me to encourage you? Or do you need me to just hold you and be with you while you're going through whatever you're going through? Another thing that's key with relationships and relationships that have, we all have our past stories and past hurts in our relationships, but this really can be kind of a clean slate. It can be an opportunity to start fresh and do things differently. So we always recommend individual counseling. Sometimes that's really helpful before a couple can feel ready to do couples counseling. So that might be a helpful alternative as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, those are great. Those are great suggestions. Thank you. And then another question is, and this is more from the survivorship lens. How do we introduce our cancer survivorship story, into a brand new relationship? What are recommendations or tips that you've used in your practice for that?
Yeah, I do want to say in all transparency, the bulk of our work is with couples who are going through a cancer diagnosis and treatment. We've talked about working more closely with people who are in the survivorship phase. But what we do know is that people are changed by cancer. And I think, again, being honest and open fairly early, maybe not on the first date of a new relationship, but fairly early, because that's a big chapter in your life. And to be able to share that and feel safe and to find out if this person is safe to share that information is something that you want to find out early on. So I would recommend talking about it and just saying that this was a big time in my life, and these are ways in which my life has changed and how I see myself has changed. And maybe I've grown in ways that I never could have imagined, or maybe I carry some shame about changes in my body that are important for me to talk about.
Thank you. And then could you talk a little bit about what kind of assistance or support is available for the caregiver in the relationship specifically?
Yeah, there are a lot more resources available for caregivers now because there's a greater understanding of how this impacts other people. So we have a support group called Caregivers Support or Caregivers Connect, I'm sorry. And that's available to caregivers. And I think cancer support community has resources available for caregivers, but there are a lot of resources out there that I think are good. And I encourage caregivers to think about this. And I wanted to share a funny little anecdote. Um, in our support group, we had a couple attending, and she's the patient. She's stage 4, and she's very feisty. And she said, I don't want you to call yourself my caregiver, speaking to her partner. You're not my caregiver. You're my support person. You're my partner. And it was really important to her. So he was able to hear that without getting defensive, without having, he heard what's important to her. And I think that's something that our caregivers really benefit from the support group, our couple support group, is just hearing other caregiver experiences and hearing the experience of other patients. So they really learn that it's not just their partner that's going through this. Might be a common theme.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. And then we talked about this before we came into the webinar today, but is the couple support group open to anyone, or do you have to be treated at City of Hope?
You do not have to be treated at City of Hope. It's open to anyone. And we feel really strongly about that because we know there isn't a lot of opportunities for couples to have that peer support, to meet with other couples who are experiencing this. And, as much as your friends and your family love you and want to understand, they don't know exactly what you're going through and how you're walking through this. So it can be really powerful for couples to have that peer support. So we do open it up to outside patients.
Great. Thank you. And then so if somebody was interested, they would contact, your contact information was on that last slide. Is that the best
Yes.
way?
Yes. There's also, you can use the email. It's couplesprogram@coh.org. And that's probably the fastest way to get a hold of anybody on the couples team.
Great. And Abby Espinoza is with me today. Abby, maybe you could put that in the chat for everybody who's here today. And then just a couple more questions before we conclude.
Mhm.
From the provider side, we've had a couple providers who've taken part in this webinar today and submitted questions. And what advice do you give them on how they should communicate these best practices, to their patients?
We talk with our providers, and they're well aware of this program by now because it's standard of care for women's cancers. But we talk about how important it is to listen to the patient and their partner, because that partner knows the patient better than anybody, right? And so oftentimes they can learn a lot. If a partner says, "This is not normal," right? My partner, this is not normal behavior of my partner, and I'm concerned. So our providers are encouraged to really view the patient and partner as integral members of the medical team, so that they have an open forum for conversation and communication about what is important to the patient and the partner, what their goals and their hopes and wishes are in terms of their treatment. So we call that maybe a goals of care conversation, but it's three-way. It's going between the patient and their partner and the provider. We encourage open and honest communication.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, as the partner being an integral part of the team.
Mhm.
It's not a revolutionary statement, but it is.
Mhm. It is, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, when a couple is effectively dealing with the stress and the challenge of cancer, it makes it easier for the provider. So that's why it's easier for them to consider the couple as members of the medical team, because it just makes everything work a little bit more smoothly.
And then a final question before, and it really is more of a statement before we share some of our resources at Cancer Support Community. It was a comment in registration, someone asking, in the midst of the challenge and the struggle of a diagnosis with their partner, recommendations for how to achieve moments of joy. Um,
Yeah, it is challenging, and it's super important to make a commitment to carve out some time every day, every week, where you can put cancer maybe to the side and just focus on each other and be Joe and Jill rather than patient and partner, or patient and caregiver, or patient and support person. But that you're really just spending some time together doing things that bring you some joy and talking about that. Like, maybe you're not able to do the things that you were doing before you got sick, but what can you still do? So, for example, I've worked with a couple that used to do a lot of traveling. And when he was going through treatment, they weren't able to do that same kind of travel because his immune system was compromised. So they made a plan that they would go to 3 times a week. They would go to a different beach, and they would sit on the beach, and they would just take their books and they would read. And it wasn't a lot of interaction necessarily in conversation, but they were there side by side having a new experience. And those new experiences is what builds intimacy between two people and builds some excitement. So just talking together about what those kinds of connections can look like, and always keep planning for the future. We just have to be a little more flexible at a time when we're going through something like this, because we don't know what bend is ahead, but it is important to keep planning.
Great advice. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you, Lynn. And Lynn, I want to thank you for your time today and for sharing your expertise with all of us. And I want to thank our attendees for your engagement and for the thoughtful questions that were submitted. And then if we could bring up our Cancer Support Community resource slide. Great, thank you. So if you would like to learn more about Cancer Support Community Los Angeles, you can visit our website at cancersupportla.org to participate in one of our people living with cancer groups, or one of our caregiver groups. Please email info@cancersupportla.org. And we would love to be of assistance to you. And thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Lynn, you are going to provide us a copy of the slides.
I will. Yeah.
Right. So if anyone would like a copy of the PowerPoint slides, email info@cancersupportla.org. And thank you. And we hope to see you all at an upcoming webinar. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend.